Welcome to Builder's Journey on the Club Pod. I'm Nicole, your host and co-creator at Seed Club. Builder's Journey brings to life the learnings from Seed Club's alumni projects, from Genesis story to forming your team to preparing for launch. In this episode, I spoke with Gabriel Tumlos from the Mochi founding team. Mochi is a team-based goal-setting game focused on collective accountability and growth. Gabriel shares how the idea for Mochi evolved through multiple crypto cycles and the different approaches to building community market fit he is currently exploring. Mochi is experimenting with in-game economies in novel ways and leaning into Web3 native partnerships to understand and design with communities, whether for shared productivity or even to achieve lucid dreaming. Lots to learn from an experienced Web3 builder. GM, how's it going?
Pretty good, GM.
Welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being on Builder's Journey. We've had a bunch of opportunities to connect, both IRL and also digitally over the last month or two. I've really been enjoying catching up on what Mochi's been doing. And I'm really excited to chat today and dig into some more details. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Before we get into all of the details and hot gossip, I would love if you could introduce yourself and your project and tell us a little bit about who you both are.
Sure, absolutely, would love to. My name is Gabriel. Hi, everyone who's listening. I've been kind of working at the intersection of what I would call culture and art and coordination since I got my start here in the crypto world several years ago. I've had the pleasure of working on a handful of projects that I think were pretty instrumental in bringing the space to where it is today, and I can share more about that later. But, after several kind of lives working through how we might make crypto make sense for the creative world and musicians in particular, I started putting together a project that's now called Mochi, which started as kind of like a small little dance party when many early crypto people were kind of working together in New York City, and has since evolved into a DAO-like organization that builds coordination games for other DAOs and decentralized teams. So that's the kind of quick version of it, and happy to dive in more.
Yeah, I have quite a few questions. I don't think that I was familiar with the sort of early genesis. And so one of the questions that I find really helpful for projects as they're beginning, because, in hindsight, all of those choices that you made make sense and they point to where you are now. But in the times that we're making them, it's a lot harder to see what the path ahead is and how you're going to get to where you hope you'll one day be. And so can you talk a little bit about what that dance party was and what were some of those early choices and just some of those early steps that were part of your Genesis story?
Yeah, when I was younger, in just around high school, I was a very scrawny boy, and I still am today. But I was very self-conscious, as one is at that age, about your weight and how you appear to other people. And I went to a school that was kind of very athletic oriented. We were known for winning football championships and that kind of thing. And I was like, to be popular and to be liked in this school, I need to play sports, and I should probably play football. And before that, I should probably put on some weight. So what I did was I looked up online how to start putting on mass and actually gaining weight, because I was kind of in that world where your metabolism is just faster than your growth, and you're kind of you can eat anything and still not put on weight. And I landed on a forum. What it was saying was to be able to kind of, put on mass quickly, you have to increase the amount of meals you eat per day. So, most people eat 3 meals per day, and it's saying you got to eat 5 and you got to eat the same amount of calories. And I was like, okay, yeah, cool. Let's do that. And you go into something with all of the fervor and energy of I'm going to change everything tomorrow. And I did it for about a week and then kind of fell off. And it turned out that, it's kind of hard to change in a heavily ingrained habit that already exists, deeply embedded in, kind of your daily ritual. So I went back to that forum. I was like, hey, I tried to do this thing, but the hard part is actually keeping it going, whatever. And they're like, oh, yeah. There's a trick to doing this. What I do is I give some money to a friend. Somebody this on the forum was saying this. I gave some money to a friend, and I tell them that I'm going to do X, Y, Z, each day. And I'm going to tell them I'm doing that. And if there's ever a day that I don't tell them, they can spend that money on whatever it is that they want. And I was like, oh, that's a really smart idea. Putting something that you're willing to lose in the event that you don't do the thing. So I called up my best friend at the time, and I gave him my credit card, and I said, hey, Al, I'm going to eat 5 meals a day for the next 30 days. And if I don't text you exactly what I ate, you can just buy whatever you want on that credit card. Granted, at that time, I was a poor high school student and I didn't have much money in my bank account. So it wasn't that much to lose, but there was still something at stake, so to speak. Sure enough, 30 days went by and I ate 150 meals by the end of it. And he didn't spend any of my money. I did put on weight. It was very unhealthy weight. I didn't really get bulky or in any meaningful way, but it was mostly just like unhealthy food that was.
Did you make the football team?
I did end up playing football for the first year. I didn't go through all the kind of like grueling pre-work that most people did. I was athletic enough to kind of play certain functions. And oddly enough, they stuck me in like a linebacker role just because I was fast, but like definitely not something I could really evolve into. That was a 1-year experiment, and thank God that kind of ended when it did. So yeah, that's kind of like, I think where I got my first taste of like having skin in the game can very powerfully change your behavior. And it wasn't really until I started experimenting with using crypto as that form of skin in the game later on that I saw that, it could not only change your behavior, but the behavior of groups of people, and then point them towards, I think, goals that improvements that they're trying to make in their own lives. So that was kind of like the first part of it.
That's so interesting. And yeah, thank you for sharing that story. Really interesting, and definitely would not have known that you were at one point in your life a football player. So it's fun being surprised. I love being surprised. I also think it's really interesting because so much of what first attracted me to crypto, and we were in some of the same conversations back in 2015 and 16 within sort of music and crypto, was around aligned incentives and coordination games. And so I think that it's, what you're doing with Mochi is a really interesting sort of meta comment of aligning incentives, within these like small groups, but then also using technology that in and of itself is designed to, align incentives and, like what is an economy, but sort of one big coordination game. So I think it's a very sort of like meta, multi-level experiment. I'm curious, maybe if you fast forward to the more recent Genesis story, where did the current iteration come from? When did you start thinking about it and sort of in earnest start building?
Yeah, definitely. I think it started right around that time, probably when we met way back when, I was working on a project called Uja Music, which was trying to figure out, probably the biggest thing you could probably try and fix inside of the music industry is just how do we get all of the global, musician rights data onto the blockchain, some kind of like, global resource database, that kind of thing, and then use the blockchain as something that could be a shared and open, transparent ledger for that. Very quickly, we found out that boiling the ocean was not the approach that was going to get any musicians paid. And, we kind of hit a wall with that. We did some, interesting experiments that I think ended up spawning a lot of kind of what we now know as the NFT space. So like, releasing collectibles for musicians' music, that sort of thing. But it was clear that we were kind of 2-3 years ahead of people really understanding what that would mean for community building, so on and so forth. I decided that at that point, it was probably time that I kind of like readjust my efforts and put it into that space directly while people were still catching up on the blockchain conversation. Because most conversations at that time were still trying to make the technology make sense to people, and we're still feeling out for the words. What I knew, though, coming out of the music experiment was that my passions and interests and everything that I cared about lived in this culture space. All of my spare time, went into going to raves and going to dance parties and organizing dinners. And I kind of made myself the de facto kind of like culture person at the company at a time when it was scaling very, very rapidly. So, to give you a kind of like a picture of the rapid pace, when I joined this company, it was about 30 people. I watched it go within the span of about 1.5 years, 2 years. It go from 30 to 50 to 100 to 200 to 500 to 1,000 to its peak about 1,400 people, all in the span of like, about 1.5 years. That scaling was so harrowing. It was just kind of this big kind of mess of people trying to do something for the Ethereum space. And along the way, young people who were part of the organization were kind of getting lost. People were hired to come do something for a project, but the project was not super well formed. So people would end up floating between several projects or would not be attached to any projects. And because I was kind of like the culture person, throwing parties and stuff, a lot of those young people came to me for just to hang out, basically. And I got to know a lot of really intelligent, incredibly talented human beings at that company. And I would just ask them, I was like, hey, what's the thing that you're working on right now? And, they'd say the kind of, oh, I'm like working on this project, that project, but I don't really have a role or responsibility there. Or I'm like figuring it out. They were just kind of floating. That to me seemed like a really big problem, especially for a company that was putting itself out there as the future of decentralized work and remote work. And I was like, it can't be a situation where these people don't have guidance, because that's not the future. That's just naive startup building. Concurrently, I had a similar problem because I had kind of detached myself from that first project that I was working on, and very quickly realized that if I didn't have the right accountability structures around myself as a solo individual, I would probably end up in the same situation as many of these people, not really having a project to kind of claim as my own, and kind of like slowly decaying into some kind of like floating entity in this like increasingly large organization. So what I started doing was publishing my work publicly. We used this document system called Quip that had as its core function kind of like documents that were prioritized and organized according to the amount of attention that they were getting. And I would just post my work publicly. And because, I was the person I was in the company, people would watch what I was doing. And that was a pretty good accountability structure for a while. But over time, the attention started dropping. And then, my commitment to the things that I was doing was starting to drop. And that's when I realized, I need people around me to stay productive. I need people around me to stay accountable. So I started gathering these people in the company in the groups. And I said, hey, let's play this game where we're going to set a goal and we're going to do this for 2 months. And I don't care what it is. It could be something personal development, running, meditating, reading more, or it could be related to creating a new NFT project, something as complex as building new features. And the shtick was, you're going to stake some crypto with me, and we use Ether, of course. And me being a former accountant, recovering accountant, I did everything in Google Sheets and kind of managed everything in my personal MetaMask. And we had this bot inside of Slack called Geekbot that would just ask you a simple set of questions every day about whatever it is that you were working on. And then you would just check in, earn tokens. And if you missed your check-in, you would lose a percentage of the Ether that you had at stake. And what I found over the next basically 8 weeks was that this was a very effective system for getting people moving and making small progress towards whatever it was that they were working on. So that was kind of, I would say, like the origin of how the first Mochi cohort came together.
I had no idea that its roots were that long and that historic. That's wild. There's actually a lot of interesting overlaps with the last conversation that I had with Jonathan Mann, who's building Song a DAO and, writing a song a day and working with others to do something a day. One of the other learnings and takeaways from my conversation with him was that, he's been through also at least one crypto winter and spent that time. For him, it didn't ever really feel like a chill because he continued to meet and connect with others and to continue, learning and thinking. I'm curious for you, obviously like you had that initial blueprint. It was similar to what you had also experimented with as a teen. At what point did you assemble a couple of people together and sort of have the first iteration of Mochi? And, I think maybe to like focus the question even a little bit more, how did you go about choosing the folks that you're currently building with? Because I think that piece is so key, is like those initial people that you're going to work day to day with is one of the most important decisions that you can make. What was that moment and how did you bring your team together?
So after, I would say it was kind of like one of the first like most significant boom bust cycles. It was like just after the 2017 ICO cycle. I left New York and I moved to Paris to live there for the summer. I had some kind of like dramatic life events happen at that time. I ended up leaving the company and then traveling the world for the next 11 months. I kind of hit the ground and then I just went east basically until I couldn't go east anymore. Throughout that time, I kind of decided to put Mochi on hold because it wasn't something that I was fully, like for me, it was a passion project. It wasn't something that I was planning on building into a proper product or anything like that. That was not, a thought yet. But throughout that year that I was on the road, I would get these little taps from people, and they would be like, hey, when's the next Mochi journey starting? I'm not doing my sit-ups anymore. A month would pass, and then another person would hit me up and they'd say, hey, Gabe, when's the next Mochi journey? Like, I'm not doing my meditations anymore. I'm like falling off. So then I started getting this idea. I was like, hey, like people want this to continue. Might there be an easy way to do it? And plus, you're on the road and you're traveling. It's like, I'm not wanting to sit around basically in a Google Sheet and doing the kind of like the tallying of people missing and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, okay, there's something that's worth automating here to make this easier so that it can keep going while I'm like basically on the move. And that's kind of when I started having the first conversations around this. The first conversation I had was with the person who actually introduced me to crypto back in 2011. He was one of my co-founders. So when I was at university, I co-founded a fraternity, a social fraternity with my dear friend Tom. And Tom was kind of the person who came up with the idea to do that back then. And he was a computer scientist, and he discovered Bitcoin pretty early from a more of the computing standpoint and introduced it to me in 2011. And like since then, we've been on every single wave that's kind of caught hold in the public consciousness from Ethereum onward. So he's the first person I go to, and he's very involved kind of like in the VC world. He's the first person I go to say, hey, I have this idea for how we might coordinate people in a decentralized context and figure out a way to have a community token for like, all the cultural stuff that we love to do. What do you think about this? And, he goes, yes, I could see this working. It's going to take a while to build it up into a vision that I think makes sense to kind of like the VC class, but I'm going to help you build the first version of that. So he comes on, and then, very quickly you realize that like one engineer is not enough. And then also you need kind of like a visual or a way that people can relate with the project visually. And then the two people that I went to immediately were, one of my oldest friends, Tyler, who is also one of the co-founders of the project. He was a graphic designer when we were at university. He was also the person that introduced me into kind of like deeper subcultures in music. So we connected pretty early on. First day of uni, actually, I walked down the hallways, everybody's door was open, and I peek into Tyler's room, and he's got two CDJs and a mixer on his table. And I was like, yes, that's the guy I need to be friends with from now until the end of college. So I have this saying, right? It's like music friends are the best friends, right? Like it's like the people that you connect with on the universals, like music and art and food. There's a deep connection there. And he's the first person I went to because he's such a talented artist and also plugged into kind of all the music culture stuff. And I said, hey, like I have this idea, let's run this. And, he just happened to be looking for a job as well. And then the other person who I would say is, very, very big part of this, another one of our co-founders, Kyle. He was one of the first engineers that we brought on to work on the Ujo project way back when. And we had we've just constantly had this rapport around, being strict around constraints on projects. We brought him on actually by doing like a timed trial. Like we put up when we launched the first kind of like rendition of Ujo music, what we did was we put up a timer onto the old website, and that was the countdown basically to launch of the new product. And Kyle came in at that time and delivered on it. And he was another person that after a party that I threw for the first Ethereal in New York City, I kind of threw a dance party and stuff, and Kyle came over to my place for the after party, and he was sifting through my records, and he was just like, yo, we listen to the same music, we need to be friends. So it's like another one of those like,
instant signals.
Kind of music things. And I don't know, I wish I could give you like more of like a thing, but like really it's been music. Yeah.
Well, I think, there's this sort of framework of the overlap in values. And I think that music is a really quick way to do a sync on that, to do a vibe check. You want the overlap in values to be almost basically a circle. And then you want the overlap in skill sets and strengths to have, as little overlap as possible. And then, your team is going to get to where it needs to be. And it sounds like, whether conscious or not, that was a big piece of your, team founding and your team coming together.
Yeah, spot on. I think it's like you nailed something there, which is like really the values, common values is like the number one thing for anything. I mean, where you're putting a team together or a community or a club or whatever, The values is the place to start. I think a lot of people make this mistake of when they try to form a community, it's like-minded people, like-minded people. But quite frankly, I don't want people that think like me. I want people that challenge my ideas. I want people that make me think differently or come with a different perspective. But at our core, our values are similar and we have common values. So I think you nailed it right on top of the head.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix where you want the pushback, but there has to be some shared understandings. If we look today, this has been fascinating for me because I honestly had no idea of the deep historical roots that this project has and the sort of slow iteration that you've been going through. I think shifting a little bit now, I know that there's a couple different iterations of Mochi out in the world and some different experiments that you're building. And I'm curious, if we look today at where the project is, an increasing term that's getting used out in sort of the Web3 world is community market fit. And I guess I'm curious, how are you thinking about community market fit for Mochi? And maybe I'll add a layer to that question, which is there a bigger community? Because what it sounds like is that a lot of what Mochi is are these small accountability groups. And so what does sort of like the next level up of community look like for Mochi?
Yeah, really, really great question. I would say Mochi, the community proper, our close-knit group of friends and family across the world is, very kind of like self-actualization oriented, like goal setting, small habits, that kind of thing. But beyond that, I think, every community is going to kind of have its own thing that it does together, and making sure that the thing that we've built makes sense and can be flexible and malleable and sticky enough for those communities is hugely important. And what we've found, or the way that we've kind of thought about how we start memeing this really like a daily ritual out into other communities, was trying to see which communities out there were already doing practices that we viewed as like very pro-social and community oriented. Was a big reason why we were very interested initially, actually, when Seed Club kind of came across our way. We noticed that you guys do this kind of cohort model, which, is a very, very strong model for bringing people in, kind of imbuing them with the culture and the values and the stories that are important to your community, making sure people start together so that you have new friends that you can make and form bonds with and kind of go on this journey. I think that's a really, really strong pattern for community building. So, we initially started with organizations that were kind of like focusing on this way to onboard their people and seeing what kinds of use cases would be most relevant to whatever it was that what they were doing. So I can give a couple of examples that, we're very excited about and, kind of that are ongoing right now. I often bring up my dear friend Maggie and the incredible work she's done with Shifi. She's kind of doing this cohort-based learning model where she's onboarding women into Web3 and teaching them kind of like the foundational aspects of DeFi and how to play in the space in a meaningful financial way. And she came to us with this, kind of need where women were completing the cohort, and then at the end were wanting to get jobs, but still had nothing really to point to in terms of how they had contributed to the space in some kind of tangible way. And we kind of dreamed together with her about how to come up with a post-cohort kind of program where women could come together on small teams, do deep dives into some new protocol, and then come out with some kind of research artifact that was valuable to both the women in the community and the broader ecosystem. So right now, they're right about in the middle of their journey, and they've just produced a piece about Toucan and refi, which is increasingly becoming taking up more mind share in the space. And I'm really, really impressed with the work that they've come up with, and they've just been running this kind of daily check-in model to keep themselves accountable. So that's one kind of like learning journey thing where, again, they start with this kind of cohort. Another one just spawned kind of serendipitously 4 weeks ago, a project called Campfire, which is a group of Web3 musicians, and this literally started on Twitter. An artist, really, really talented artist named TK, whom I met, just a few months ago, basically at a flea market in LA. He asked me, he's like, hey, what do you work on or whatever? I was like, oh, I work on, crypto stuff. And he's like, I'm trying to get into that. And I was just like, do you have a MetaMask wallet? And he was just like, MetaMask wallet. I was like, okay, we need to talk. And after that, it turns out he started hosting crypto events, started releasing music. And now he's just, he's now a champion for NFT music. On Twitter, he just started kind of like a conversation. It's like, hey, can we get together and start making music together every day? And our DAO success lead, Alec, joined up with them, and they've become close friends. And they decided to put together a community and started off by using Mochi as like the kind of core initial organizational paradigm, they split up into, I think, 5 different teams, and have been using Mochi to, write music every day, create sample packs, write like 2 lines of lyrics every day, but all towards this kind of like iterative development of a creative process, which is really the use case that I was very, very excited for when Mochi came up. If you kind of boil down like how Mochi works, right? This kind of like 8-week journey with daily check-ins where you're reflecting and planning. It comes from this agile methodology that I learned when I was on Ujo. And it was something that I had never learned until I had that experience. And I went, wow, what a great way to like get stuff done. That's, not so much effort, but you only learn this methodology if you were lucky enough to kind of study in some kind of technical degree or be a part of a team that builds this way. And I thought, well, there's so many people on earth that could benefit from this organizational paradigm that just will never learn it because they'll never work for a tech company. And I thought, well, wouldn't this be a great way to kind of teach people how to use this for creative endeavors or for personal wellness endeavors, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that in there. And those are just 2 quick examples of, use cases that we're really, really interested in.
I believe that you have a token coming out into the world before long. I'm curious sort of when that comes out into the world, going back to what I talked about as far as sort of the meta aspect of these aligned incentives. So obviously like SheFi and this Campfire project, those are all sort of smaller aligned incentives groups. But once there's a token out in your community, there's also these, coordination games and aligned incentives within your community. And so I have 2 questions, one very community focused, which is what do you see that unlocking for your community and how are you hoping and thinking about what the token is going to mean once it's out in the world for all of your community members. And then the other piece is around sort of preparing for that launch. Yeah, first, let's talk about what this next level of community development looks like.
People have been playing our game now for the better part of 2 years with some real incentives involved, right? They've been staking real Ether. And, in many cases, they started playing this game back 2 years ago when Ether was like, hovering around $100 to $300 and have actually made money by keeping their money in our contract. So they've been playing with real incentives and have been earning tokens daily, but those tokens have not been quote unquote real. Like they're not on any market, they're not on any exchange. They're basically getting paid in credits, right? So what we've been able to prove over the past 2 years was that incentives work. And like, in fact, getting paid in something like the token, whatever, is not the most important part. And the system can function and work even if these tokens are just purely theoretical. I think moving them into the actual kind of domain of the real is going to do a couple things for us. One, it's going to, make tangible, I think, the efforts and like the going through kind of like the beta iterations of this, all of the kind of like trial and tribulation with that. It's going to turn that into something tangible that can be moved around and felt and exchanged for things, and creating some kind of economic opportunity there in a very real sense by putting it on chain does for our community. It does good for our community, and 2, it gives them opportunities to kind of take their hard work and exchange it for things that they might find cool, interesting, or add utility basically to their lives. So once that token comes on live, we're going to have a shop basically that's going to be available where the tokens can be exchanged for items that are going to kind of be in service of this living, breathing kind of Tamagotchi style avatar that's your Mochi. And also items that help you perform better in the game so that you can keep playing, keep getting your things done, and then, do well and earn tokens and, rinse and repeat. So creating kind of like this economy where tokens can be spent and like, your efforts can be rewarded in a tangible way, I think is one thing.
I'm excited to see what happens with the distribution within your community. And, I think that what's fun about that is that you can create the conditions and sort of the structures, but the actual behaviors and habits and experiments that the community is going to then run. I know you have some ideas and you've responded sort of to, community member demand, for example, to be able to change your goal. I think that was a really interesting sort of little element that you're going to be allowed with this new iteration. But I think, the other piece is that you don't know what you don't know. And so that's in a lot of ways the fun piece of you put something out into the community and you're going to see what they make of it. What are the other types of preparation that you're doing? I mean, this is, I think so much of this is often behind the scenes. You often just see the headline or the announcement or the Twitter space or the hello world or, whatever it might be of like, oh, this thing is live now, or we can go access this, or I can get Mochi tokens, or I can do this thing with them, or, whatever it may be. But we rarely see all of the sweat and the sleepless nights that are behind that. And it takes a tremendous amount of work. And so I'm curious, can you share a little bit about the thinking and the planning and some of the key deliverables that you're working on that you feel like are going to put you in a good place when that goes live?
Yeah, definitely. Right now, I think what was spurred coming out of the accelerator was like as far and wide and deep of use case exploration that we can do with a variety of communities. So, since the accelerator, we've onboarded, I think, up to 20 now communities that are running their own journeys, and many of them are kind of distinct and doing different lengths, doing different kind of questions daily. So that kind of use case exploration is helpful for us because we want to produce kind of like case studies, basically, which we can point to and say, hey, look, Mochi made that, or hey, Mochi can be used to do this kind of thing in your community. What we need to do is seed the dream amongst people. I think when people look at a piece of tech, they go, oh, okay, so what am I supposed to use this for? And oftentimes, the thing that it's prescribed to do is not the thing that it's actually best for. And the discovery of what it's best for comes from the community, right? So we're just trying to seed it out as many places far and wide to get people kind of using this and like honestly to break it and then see what it might be used for after it's broken. So there's a handful of those experiments, the ones that I kind of mentioned to you. So it's like kind of spawning these communities. And then the other side of it is like getting it into the hands of developers that might be building tech in meaningful places that are culturally oriented. So I just had a fantastic conversation with one of our mentors, Mikhail from Zora. And Zora's putting on a really awesome hackathon with ETH Global coming up soon, 500 plus developers. So if you're an engineer and you're like trying to do something in the cultural space and want to build on what is the best, I think, vision for NFTs right now, Zora's going to do this hackathon and we're going to put on a workshop on like how you use Mochi to basically organize decentralized teams. Right. So this is another place where we can start to insert this pattern into people's minds so that they understand that like, hey, there's a way of doing things that can work for teams that are becoming increasingly decentralized. So that's more of a technical kind of use case that we're kind of currently exploring. And then the other ones are like, how weird and esoteric and strange can we push this technology to like really imbue a sense of magic in this space again? Because I think with every bull cycle, it brings in new people and the values kind of get diluted in a weird way. And then like everybody's here kind of for the gold rush for a second. And then when it washes away, it's like, well, what are we here for? Right? What are we doing? Is this all just the same thing? Are we just like hyper financializing everything and just get in, get out as soon as you can? And I don't think that's the case. That's not what I joined this space to do. So at every step of the way, we need to continue to inspire new dreams amongst people to use this technology in whatever flexible, strange, way that they can. That's going to help us craft out this new world that I think we all joined here to make. So we're experimenting with themed cohorts coming up. So up until now, Mochi has been kind of just like you come in with your own goal that you want to set. You're going to work on it for 8 weeks. We put you on a team, so on and so forth. It's just very, very general and abstract. What we're now going to start doing is themed cohorts. And the first themed cohort that we're experimenting with is a cohort called the Dream Oscillator. I'm very into dream aesthetics right now and dreaming and lucid dreaming and thinking about dreams as proper metaverse. Because if you think about, dream space, it's such a strange, surreal space where like the rules of base reality don't really work the same way that they do. Clocks don't tick the right way. Wristwatches don't click the right way. Gravity doesn't have to work the same way. Structures that are impossible can exist. And that's a proper space where I think we can start to dream and imagine new possible worlds and aesthetics that might suit the world that we're heading towards in waking life. And what we would love to do and what we're experimenting with right now is, can we use Mochi to teach people how to lucid dream, basically be aware and be consciousness in an activity that we spend a majority of our life doing, right? So, and lucid dreaming is really, if you break it down, a set of habits. It's daily dream journaling and it's doing reality checks so that you do it when you are asleep, which triggers kind of consciousness while you're sleeping. So what we hope is at the end of that experiment, we'll have some people that were able to trigger lucid dreams and then also collect kind of like almost like a notebook full of crazy, wild, wacky, surreal experiences that people have. See where we might intersect and even possibly meet up in dreaming life. and then use that as the seed for a super secret special possible party event thing down the line in October, if you happen to be in South America.
In a dream, though. You have to be in South America in a dream. It's Metaverse 4.0. In seriousness, though, I think it's super interesting because there's no lack of accountability and wellness apps that you can download on your phone or something like that. But I think that what's so interesting about what you're building is sort of what's the next level and what are the superpowers that are unlocked by a community that is doing this together, and how does the community harness the power that they're co-creating rather than, again, an app just capitalizing on your need to stake some resources or have a monthly subscription or whatever. And so I think that it's just such an ingenious Web3 way of looking at group accountability and then what that group is capable of eventually doing. Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, we kind of already do it, right? Like we kind of already do it in our present kind of like economy, right? It's like you pay a monthly membership to go to the gym, and then you like go to your like yoga studio, and then like you have your music group of friends that you pay like $10 to go to the event. And it's like, well, what if we like created little communities and cohorts like that like really worked on those things all together, and then at the end of it, maybe we could issue like NFTs, and it's like, oh, you've gone through the 2+ mental wellness journey. Here's a special item that you can like tack onto the top of your Mochi, rinse and repeat for any kind of, very specific community, and we're all trying to figure out how to compile different facets of our identity now in Web3 space. And I can't think of a better way to like come back to what I think the web was supposed to do, which is connect us all around the things that we love to do. And be together in what has, I think, up until now been a very isolating space.
I have one final question for you in classic my style. It's a two-parter. You're a very curious person. You have a lot of passions, clearly a lot of interests. You love to meet people. And yet one of the most essential pieces of creating a successful project is focus and decision making. And so how do you cultivate your curiosity? It seems like it's a natural habit for you, but how do you cultivate your curiosity? And then when you need to, how do you focus and make hard decisions?
I think curiosity, like everything else, is something to be cultivated, and it's almost habitual at this point, right? I've almost like over time kind of just made a point to push the boundaries of the things that I am comfortable with, just a tiny little bit every step of the way. I think with curiosity and with anything, in curiosity comes kind of change, right? Because you're kind of like putting your hand out and trying to see if there's something more, right? This is kind of fundamentally what curiosity is about. And it's about growth. And I think what people, sometimes struggle with growth and like kind of doing the curious thing is like, they want to go really big, really fast. It's like, what's the hardest, most challenging thing? And let me do that tomorrow. Really, I think the most successful way to kind of cultivate that curiosity and like eventually reach that big change, small steps every day, just tiny tests of your comfortability and pushing out further and further into the world. And by doing that daily and by creating a practice around that, you become a curious person because you practice it daily. Curiosity is now a one-off thing that you can just do and turn it off. It's now something that I can't stop doing. My mind is kind of like, how do I break this thing? What else can it be used for? You could talk to Gabe, with Floppy. I was just like, can you sample an entire metaverse and put it into this DAW and like, make music out of what is fundamentally just digital information, right? It's like, I don't know, but like it comes from a place of like, I am a child at my core, and I have questions, and like, I don't understand why anything works the way it does. And I'm going to poke until I figure out why we do things this way. And can there be another way that is fairer and more equitable for people? So that's the first question. The second question was just like, how does one deal with, making hard decisions? Also a habit, also something that has to be cultivated. We live in a world of abundance, right? Or at least digital abundance at present. And increasingly the task is not to just, keep consuming. I think that's what many of us struggle with. You have to draw meaningful boundaries at certain points. And that is also a practice. We need to kind of like, you have to be very much in touch with what's necessary and what's desired. And if you can find separation between those two, drawing meaningful boundaries again daily about where how far you should go, and limits. Again, they're really one and the same. This curiosity kind of like a limitation thing, because it's like if you go too far, you fall off the cliff. You want to go and just test the edge, and then pull it back a little bit. They're really one and the same process. Actually, both of them require courage. You have to have courage to step out of who you think you are, and also have courage to say, hey, this is where I'm at right now, and that's okay. And it's a process.
I think that they're both incredibly important for founding teams to both push yourself outside of the comfort zone, but then also we're in a moment right now where at least people are feeling pressure to make hard decisions. Having the courage and the focus to do that is very hard, but very critical. Well, thank you so much. I am just so much better informed and really excited for all of the different ways that Mochi is out experimenting, and really excited to see the progress in the coming weeks. Very interested and curious about what's going to be happening in South America in a few months. Really excited for people to follow along and join. If people want to learn more, where's the best way to stay up to date?
Definitely our Twitter, Bond with Mochi. Check out our website, mochi.game, if you want to kind of get a little bit more about how the game works. If you're curious about the community, mochi.world. And yeah, I would say those are the best things. If you like pictures, we also have an Instagram, Bond with Mochi.
You guys have a beautiful visual aesthetic that I really appreciate. So it's worth going into Web 2.0 just to check it out. Well, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Good to chat as always.
Thanks for having me on.